book nobody can read. 200-plus pages of alien letters and fever dream diagrams locked away in a Yale vault.
The fact that the manuscript is written in a way that nobody else could read it suggests that it is preserving knowledge that someone wanted to keep secret.
For 6 centuries, from Renaissance alchemists to Alan Turing, every codebreaker has taken a swing and struck out. Now an AI claims it's finally cracked the Voynich Manuscript, and the result is not what anyone hoped.
1700 rökstólabróðir. Hvað hef ég gjört til að bera svo bága kvenhyrni?
If that alphabet was used for something else, we would know how to speak it, how to pronounce these words.
Are you sure about that?
Rewind. 1912, a Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich hauls this vellum enigma out of a Jesuit library. Carbon dating pins its creation to the late 1400s. No Rosetta Stone, no known alphabet, just a riddle that refused to give up its secrets, until now. In the next 30 minutes, I'll unpack exactly what the AI found.
It was a question a student had asked him. Will AI claim God really won't keep these commandments? This book really is divine.
Enter the AI bold claims. Now, after so many human failures, it was perhaps inevitable that researchers would turn to a new kind of codebreaker, one born not of flesh and blood, but of algorithms and silicon. By the 21st century, some wondered if a machine could do what human brains could not. In 2016, a computer scientist named Greg Kondrak and his graduate student Bradley Hauer at the University of Alberta decided to apply cutting-edge artificial intelligence to the medieval Voynich puzzle. They built an AI system to analyze the Voynich text.
Analysis and computer-assisted decoding methods, we can easily crack coded texts up to the 17th, even the 18th century.
Their idea was bold. Use AI to guess what language the Voynich manuscript was originally written in by comparing patterns from the Voynich text to patterns from known languages.
If that alphabet was used for something else, we would know how to speak it, how to pronounce these words.
Are you sure about that?
Essentially, let the algorithm detect what human language DNA might be hiding in Voynichese. If classical cryptography and human intuition had failed, maybe brute force computing and pattern recognition could finally crack the code. Kondrak and Hauer taught their AI by feeding it the same document written in 380 different languages, specifically the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights in hundreds of tongues. This gave the algorithm a crash course in the statistical fingerprints of all those languages, the frequencies of letter combinations, common word patterns, etc. In essence, the AI learned to look at any chunk of text and say, these patterns resemble Spanish more than German, or this looks more like Italian than Latin, purely based on letter sequences.
Is to find out what language this is written in. If we don't know what the language it is written in, then there's no way to decipher it.
It didn't actually understand the content. It was just learning what various languages look like in a numerical sense. Once their AI had digested this multilingual library, the researchers turned it loose on Voynichese. This was the moment of truth. Would the machine recognize a familiar linguistic pattern hidden in that gibberish?
1700 rökstólabróðir. Hvað hef ég gjört til að bera svo bága kvenhyrni?
Soon, the algorithm spit out a result, and it surprised everyone. The AI concluded that the Voynich manuscript's mysterious text was most likely Hebrew.
But this script, similarities to Hebrew script, I know that the Hebrew script does not include vowels, which makes the words shorter. And this is what we observe in Voynich, is that the words are quite short.
Not Latin or any European tongue, but medieval Hebrew, albeit encrypted in some way. Once their AI had digested this multilingual library, the researchers turned it loose on Voynichese. This was the moment of truth. Would the machine recognize a familiar linguistic pattern hidden in that gibberish? Soon, the algorithm spit out a result, and it surprised everyone. The AI concluded that the Voynich manuscript's mysterious text was most likely Hebrew. Not Latin or any European tongue, but medieval Hebrew, albeit encrypted in some way. And not just by a slim margin, the AI result was overwhelmingly tilted toward Hebrew. In their tests, over 80% of the Voynich's words showed patterns most consistent with medieval Hebrew if, and this was a big if, you assume each Voynich word is an anagram of a Hebrew word with the vowels removed.
If anyone were to create such a book as the Voynich, they would have ended up with a very valuable document.
This hypothesis was intriguing. It suggested that whoever wrote the Voynich manuscript might have taken normal Hebrew words, stripped out all the vowels, as written Hebrew often does, and then shuffled the letters of each word. It's a wild double transformation cipher, reordering letters and dropping vowels. But that was the hypothesis the AI pointed to. Hebrew came out on top in the algorithm's ranking. For the record, a couple of other languages like Malay and Arabic also scored relatively high in the AI's analysis, an oddity since those have no historical or linguistic connection to Hebrew, but Hebrew was the highest score. So the researchers ran with it. Maybe Voynich was garbled Hebrew. Now, how to prove it? To test their idea, the team focused on a small sample of text. They chose the opening line of the manuscript, the very first sentence on the first page, figuring it might hint at the book's content.
I'd say the greater preponderance of text in this book has to do with botanicals, herbal.
The plan was to apply their decoding scheme to that line and see if any meaningful sentence appeared. So they did exactly that. They wrote a program to take Voynich's first sentence, treat each word as an alphabetically sorted anagram, and convert those letters into what they thought would be Hebrew. The result was still gibberish. Undeterred, they made a few manual tweaks, adjusting some spellings, guessing a couple of missing vowels, basically nudging the output closer to real Hebrew. Then, for a final assist, they plugged this semi-deciphered line into Google Translate, asking it to go from modern Hebrew to English. And voila, out popped a full English sentence, a strange, almost poetic sentence. She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me, and people. According to Kondrak and Hauer, this could be the first sentence of the Voynich manuscript, decoded at last by AI.
Is how quickly text can be produced using this method, whether or not it would be feasible to use this method.
It's a complete sentence in English. It's grammatical. It even has a somewhat antiquated ring to it, as if translated from an old scripture or letter. Could it be a clue to the manuscript's meaning? The researchers themselves were a bit taken aback. Greg Kondrak admitted, "It's a kind of strange sentence to start a manuscript." Indeed, that is one way to put it. Emboldened by this output, the AI team noted a few other bits of Voynichese that seemed to yield Hebrew words. For instance, they pointed out that some individual Voynich words, especially from the herbal sections, could correspond to simple Hebrew words, like everyday nouns, if the letters were rearranged and vowels added. It was enough for them to speculate that perhaps the manuscript was some kind of herbal or medical guide written in enciphered Hebrew. News of these findings hit headlines in early 2018, and it hit hard.
Then scribe 2 on the left, where you have this sloped line of writing, the letters are squished together. So there is a clear distinction between these two hands.
After hundreds of years, has a computer finally cracked the Voynich? Articles and TV segments touted that AI had decoded the infamous manuscript. The world's most mysterious book, solved by modern algorithms. It made for an irresistible story, artificial intelligence versus an ancient enigma, and people were certainly hungry for any answer, even a tentative one. The idea of a 600-year-old puzzle being deciphered by a 21st century supercomputer captured the public's imagination. But was this really the Voynich manuscript's big breakthrough? Or just a high-tech red herring? The researchers' claims were bold, yes, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Voynich Manuscript is a book written by hand that is reliably dated to the early part of the 15th century.
Uh-oh, it's not what we hoped. So what exactly did the AI's grand decoding give us? Did we finally unearth a secret message hidden for centuries?
The surface of the parchment is very smooth and undisturbed. I don't see any abrasion.
Unfortunately, no. The short answer, it was a bit of a mess. That one bizarre sentence, "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me and people," is technically coherent, but it doesn't illuminate much. It's oddly specific yet utterly cryptic. Or as tech writer James Vincent put it, a sentence that makes grammatical sense but could have been produced by a dog walking across a keyboard in Google Translate. It sounds more like the start of a medieval HR memo than a passage from a secret wisdom text. Not exactly the profound revelation Voynich enthusiasts were hoping for. Beyond that single line, the AI didn't deliver any deeper insight. There was no miraculous decoding of entire paragraphs, no clear explanation of the manuscript's content. Just that one peculiar sentence and a handful of guesses.
At least we were starting to decode this without actually deciphering the language.
The few individual words the AI team highlighted, farmer, light, air, fire, were cherry-picked and only translated by rearranging letters and adding vowels to fit Hebrew. In other words, these supposed translations were highly speculative. You can rearrange nonsense and sometimes accidentally form real words in any language if you try hard enough. Given enough Scrabble tiles pulled from a bag at random, once in a while you'll spell a real word by pure chance. As some observers noted, once you allow this much freedom, dropping vowels, shuffling letters arbitrarily, you can essentially find any meaning you want in the text. It's as if our AI detective desperately picked through a jumble of letters and proclaimed, "Look, I found the word light," when in reality, those could easily be coincidences rather than deliberate clues. In fact, the way that sentence was obtained raises a lot of eyebrows. The AI didn't just read the Voynich manuscript and translate it. The result had to be coaxed through assumptions, manual tweaks, and a heavy assist from Google Translate. After guessing the language, Hebrew, and applying a cipher method involving anagrammed words without vowels, the researchers still got nonsense, so they adjusted the output and let Google fill in the rest. What we got was a polished English sentence. That was ironically still nonsense. The initial thrill of AI decoded Voynich faded fast under scrutiny. Instead of revealing a lost medieval secret, the AI's output felt more like a clever illusion. A machine spitting out a sentence-shaped string that only seemed meaningful. As one writer wryly noted, it wasn't a revelation. It was like letting an oracle mumble in pseudo-English.
Were exactly the things you'd expect if somebody was producing something artificially and trying to make it look like a language.
The manuscript didn't suddenly speak. We nudged, tweaked, and essentially willed a sentence into existence. Some observers found this not only disappointing, but potentially misleading. Taken at face value, the bold claim that the Voynich was solved by AI could send other researchers, or the public, chasing down a false trail. Was the manuscript really imparting advice to a priest and people of the house? Or was that line just an artifact of forcing an AI to output something? Given the flimsy methodology, many experts caution that this so-called solution was built on too many leaps of faith to take seriously. In short, the AI's result turned out to be incoherent and unconvincing upon scrutiny. The Voynich manuscript was not suddenly unlocked. Its mysteries remained essentially intact. Naturally, the scholars and cryptographers who have spent years, even lifetimes, studying the Voynich manuscript had a lot to say about this AI experiment, and they didn't hold back.
I believe that we will be able to read these manuscripts because of new technologies, new techniques.
Expert reactions. The scholarly reaction to these AI claims was swift and often withering. On one side, flashy headlines were declaring the mystery solved by a clever computer. On the other, actual Voynich researchers and linguists were saying, "Not so fast." One journalist from The Verge memorably likened the whole affair to Watching Godzilla fight Mothra, the spectacle is so fun that we don't care about the details. It made for great entertainment and clickable news, but the substance behind the claims just wasn't there. Very quickly, a consensus formed among experts that this was not a legitimate decipherment of the Voynich Manuscript, just an intriguing attempt that had been dramatically oversold. Voynich scholars and cryptography experts raised several key objections to Kondrak and Hauer's conclusions. Let's break down the biggest issues they pointed out.
Are completely appropriate to the 15th and 16th centuries, and more importantly, we did not find any materials that would indicate that it was a 19th or 20th century forgery.
Trained on the wrong century. The AI was trained on modern languages, like 20th century Hebrew from those UN documents, yet it was trying to decode a 15th century text. Language evolves drastically over centuries. As medievalist Lisa Fagan Davis explained, training an algorithm on modern Hebrew and then applying it to a Middle Ages cipher.
The most mysterious feature, however, is the text. It is written in a unique alphabet.
Is like teaching someone today's English and asking them to interpret Chaucer's Middle English. The vocabulary and grammar are completely different. Davis flatly said that a model trained in the wrong era cannot reliably be used to read the Voynich. In effect, the AI was an expert in the wrong dialect and time period, a time traveler with no knowledge of the local language. Highest score meant little. Yes, the AI's top guess for Voynich's language was Hebrew. But an algorithm will always produce something as the top result. That doesn't mean the top result is a good match, especially if other candidates are almost as likely. In this case, the second-place contender was apparently Malay, a language totally unrelated to Hebrew, which raised a big red flag. As computational linguist Shlomo Argamon remarked, someone has to have the highest score. If an algorithm nearly ties Hebrew and Malay as possibilities, it suggests the method isn't truly discerning a real underlying language. It's just picking the best of a bunch of poor fits. Without a clear margin of confidence, proclaiming it's Hebrew was misleading. It was more like Hebrew barely edged out some other random languages. Questionable cipher assumption. The entire decoding attempt hinged on one very big assumption, that each Voynich word is an anagram of a real word, specifically a Hebrew word with its vowels removed. This alphagram hypothesis was not proven. It was simply a tactic the researchers decided to try. Critics pointed out that by assuming this highly flexible anagram rule, the team gave themselves huge latitude to shuffle nonsense into something meaningful. If that assumption is wrong, the whole translation falls apart. As Argamon put it, the authors were engaging in impressionistic interpretation, basically seeing patterns because they really looked hard for them, not because those patterns were truly there. Heavily fudged translation. Even the researchers acknowledged that the AI didn't produce a coherent sentence on its own. They had to manually tweak the output and rely on Google Translate to get that one line. Using Google Translate as a crutch is highly unorthodox in serious decipherment work. As Lisa Fagan Davis commented, if you resort to Google instead of consulting a human expert in medieval languages, you're going to lose some credibility.
AI helped us in large portions, writing better code and even being part in our algorithms.
And Google's algorithms, by design, will output a smooth sentence even when given nonsense. They're built to always produce something that looks like real language. Argamon noted that Google will often turn gibberish into coherent sentences because it's trying to be helpful. In this case, Google may have essentially forced a normal-sounding English sentence out of what was otherwise gibberish. So that big dramatic line, "She made recommendations to the priest," was likely as much Google's creative translation as anything genuinely hidden in the Voynich text. No real breakthrough. When all was said and done, experts agreed that the AI had not truly solved anything. The output was grammatical but essentially meaningless. A polished sentence structure with no verified connection to the actual manuscript. It didn't unlock even a single word of Voynich's with certainty. As one researcher put it, this was a fun exercise, but not the long-sought Rosetta Stone for Voynich's. Nick Pelling, a leading Voynichologist, known for his Cipher Mysteries blog, was asked how likely it was that the AI solution was correct. His answer, so close to 0%, it makes no practical difference. In other words, virtually zero. He even wryly added that despite all his years of study, he still can't read a single word of the Voynich, and now neither can the AI. That little joke underlined the point. Nothing credible had changed. The Voynich manuscript was still as unreadable as ever. In short, despite the buzz and excitement, the expert community made it clear that we are no closer to truly deciphering the Voynich manuscript. Kondrak and Hauer's experiment offered an interesting new hypothesis to test, but it did not provide a definitive translation or any breakthrough that withstands scrutiny. At best, their work was a curious side note in Voynich research. At worst, a distraction based on wishful thinking. The enduring mystery of the Voynich remained intact, as confounding as ever. What AI can and can't do. This whole Voynich AI saga turned out to be more than just a quirky news story. It became a case study in the strengths and limitations of artificial intelligence. It highlighted what AI is good at and what it still struggles with, especially when confronted with an ancient puzzle deeply rooted in human culture. First, the strengths. AI, particularly the kind used here, excels at finding statistical patterns in huge amounts of data. It can detect subtle frequencies and correlations far beyond what a human could compute. Kondrak's algorithm dutifully scanned Voyniches and noticed patterns that faintly resembled those of known languages, hence its guess of Hebrew.
The fact that the manuscript is written in a way that nobody else could read it suggests that it is preserving knowledge that someone wanted to keep secret.
In tasks like these, AI doesn't get tired or biased by expectations. It just crunches numbers and outputs the most probable answer according to its training. But here's the catch. AI doesn't truly understand meaning the way humans do. As the AI experts at MIT Sloan have noted, today's AI systems do not have the ability to think or form beliefs. They operate algorithmically based on their training data without any inherent capacity for reasoning or reflection. In plain terms, the Voynich AI wasn't sitting there pondering medieval manuscripts or trying to interpret an old book. It was crunching letter frequencies and matching patterns to whatever languages it knew. It's more of a savant code cracker than an archaeologist or linguist, a pattern-finding machine with no true insight into what it's looking at. Think of a modern AI as a super-advanced auto-completion engine. You've seen how your phone suggests the next word as you text. Scale that up massively, and that's essentially how these systems generate output. They predict sequences of letters or words that look plausible based on the examples in their training data. Crucially, they do not verify whether those sequences make sense in real life. The AI has no common sense or contextual awareness.
Because AI doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is part of society, and it has impacts on people and the planet.
Any meaning that appears in its output can be coincidental. In the Voynich case, the system saw an odd sequence of letters and made its best guess at a language, Hebrew, that could produce such a pattern. But it had zero context for what the Voynich manuscript is, zero understanding of what an herbal remedy text versus a magical text might look like. It had no model of medieval reality to check its work against. To illustrate this blind spot, imagine you trained an AI on thousands of love letters, then handed it an encrypted passage from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. The AI might confidently spit out a fluent English sentence about modern romance, grammatically correct, maybe even sweet-sounding, but completely missing the mark of Shakespeare's actual meaning. The AI will always give you something. It won't raise its hand and say, "I have no idea what this is." If it has to, it will hallucinate an answer. AI researchers actually use the term hallucinate for when an AI invents a plausible-sounding but incorrect output. Or as some like to say, AI doesn't lie, but it will fabricate.
Was to show genealogically how Jesus was descended from King David, which was critically important in order to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah.
It will produce something that looks real, even if it's just making it up from patterns. And that's exactly what happened with the Voynich project. The algorithm wasn't truly reading the manuscript at all. It was more like it tried to force-fit the Voynich text to the closest match in its memory banks. It's as if we blindfolded a translator, spun them around, and they randomly picked a language to try first. The AI guessed Hebrew simply because some statistical features were vaguely lined up. But without deeper understanding, it could have just as easily been guessed wrong. And indeed, we have no evidence that Hebrew is relevant at all. The AI couldn't tell us why Voynich looked like Hebrew. It could only offer a blind statistical hunch. Another crucial limitation highlighted by this episode is training data bias. AI models know what they know, nothing more. If something, like a medieval cryptographic script or an obscure language, isn't represented in their training data, they struggle. Kondrac's AI was trained on modern texts and languages. The Voynich script, by contrast, has characters and structures unlike anything in that training diet.
And you might be the lucky owner of one of the most mysterious books in the world.
In other words, the algorithm was really out of its element, like trying to use a metal detector to find plastic. When confronted with completely unfamiliar data, AI systems often default to what they do know, even if it's a stretch. In technical terms, they might overfit or hallucinate to produce an answer regardless of whether it's valid. Voynich's strange writing gave the AI so much leeway, especially with that anagram assumption, that the machine basically invented a translation that seemed closest to known patterns. But closest isn't the same as correct. None of this is to say that AI is useless in such quests, far from it. The fact that an algorithm could chew through hundreds of languages and even come up with a hypothesis is impressive in its own right. Machine learning is opening new ways to analyze old problems, and perhaps with better training data, say, feeding it lots of medieval Hebrew texts or other 15th century writings. An AI might glean more insights from Voynich. But this episode is a strong reminder that AI is a tool, not a magic wand. It can sift through possibilities at lightning speed and spot patterns we might miss, but it cannot, at least not yet, replicate the full spectrum of human insight, intuition, and contextual understanding, especially for something as human as language and history. In the end, the Voynich AI experiment illustrated a humbling truth.
Pages vibrated, and you could feel it. It was as if the book was humming.
Some riddles, especially those tangled up in human culture, don't yield to brute force computation. The limits of AI became part of the story, just as much as the mystery of the manuscript itself. Mystery intact? First, the Voynich manuscript remains unsolved. Even with our most advanced machines, the code holds firm. In a strange way, it's humbling. A reminder that not every riddle crumbles under the weight of data and computation. But maybe that's not a failure. Maybe that's the point. The manuscript's true power lies not in the secrets it hides, but in the questions it raises. Why does a book of unreadable text still capture us? Because it stirs our imagination. It drives linguists, historians, cryptographers, and now programmers to think differently, collaborate, and keep searching. The AI episode also reminded us of something old school, the value of human scholarship. Algorithms can offer sparks of insight, but they can't replace the slow, careful grind of discovery.
And also, there's a lot of extra effort that goes in. It's not just the technology. But that was the scariest, most interesting AI, and now what do we call that? We call that traditional AI.
As one writer said, the AI's attempt was like a firework. Bright, brief, and ultimately fleeting, the landscape unchanged. And maybe that's a relief. For researchers like Lisa Fagan-Davis and Nick Pelling, who've spent decades on the Voynich, a quick AI victory would have felt hollow, like winning a marathon by taking a helicopter. There's pride in the fact that the mystery still stands. Perhaps the Voynich wasn't meant to be solved easily. Maybe it's a message preserved for the far future, not for machines, but for a person patient enough to hear it. Until then, the pursuit continues, the code endures, and that in itself is a kind of magic.